Bitcoin forecast. Let's go. 6K was your last downside. What are you sticking to that?
So first support is 12 to 13,000. I think in the near term, we're going to see a little bit of a bounce, then a wave down to 12 to 13. And then I do worry that you're going sub 10 to 8, maybe even worst case scenario, 3,500.
안녕하세요, 오랜만입니다. 오랜만이네요. 그동안 좀 많이 바빴습니다. 뭐 그렇다고 생산적인 활동에 바빴던 건 아니고요. 굉장히 쓸데없는, 굉장히 비생산적인 것에 많이 바빴고요. 저 같은 쩌리 방송 얼마나 봐주실지 모르겠지만 앞으로 정말 열심히, 최대한 노력해서 정말 열심히 영상 만들어 보겠습니다. 감사합니다.
이 새끼한테 입만 벌리면 거짓말이 자동으로 나와.
I'd like to start by a statement. We're recalling a statement that you made 2 weeks ago, which is that you felt the panic. And as we're speaking today, all the futures are up. Stocks, Bitcoin, S&P and NASDAQ. Gold is slightly up. Now, 2 weeks ago, we spoke on a day when the NASDAQ was down 2% on the day. So your statement was understandable back then. Are you still feeling the panic today, Gareth?
There is. There's no doubt that there's panic in the markets, but per the VIX, we haven't hit the levels where I would say there's a market bottom yet, right? So I've been consistently saying, yes, you're going to get bounces when you get these big sell-offs, 2%, 3%, you get that kind of mid-level panic that triggers a bounce, but by no means is the market at a near bottom yet.
Why do you say that? Why aren't we near a bottom?
Well, because number one, you still have the Fed that's aggressively hiking. As of now, we'll see what the CPI data is coming up, but for the most part, the Fed is hiking. We have an economy that's going to slow down. And I think to be honest, that's one of the biggest concerns I have. And this is kind of shocking. This will be shocking to people, but you have $1 trillion in savings that consumers accumulated over COVID, right? And so the Fed is saying, oh, look at these jobs numbers. They're still very, very strong. People are still spending. The consumer's still doing well. So we have to continue to hike rates. Problem is, consumers are going to run out of that money that they saved probably by mid-next year. And my biggest fear, and this is this could be what triggers a massive kind of recession, if not worse, is that when they run out of money and the Fed has just hiked and hiked into it, there's going to be a cliff dive in the economy.
A cliff dive in the economy. How's that different from a recession?
Well, a recession can be mild, right? I mean, you could have, okay, it's a little minor recession. I mean, even the Fed has said, hey, we don't care if we push the economy into a recession. But a cliff dive, that's where you have unemployment going to 5, 7, 8, 9, 10%. And that's where you get in trouble, where the Fed then has to start lowering rates instead of just going to neutral where they're not hiking anymore. And potentially down the line, I do worry that it's going to get so bad that even with 4% inflation, you still could see a point where in like a year, 2 years from now, the Fed has to actually start QE again.
I thought we were already in a recession.
Well, all right, so technically per GDP, you can make a case for that, right? But I think a lot of people have argued that it's not a true recession because you have to deal with the COVID aftermath and then what's going on with that kind of stuff. So you had COVID kind of affecting GDP for a while, and the jobs numbers have been strong. But again, I would strongly encourage people to understand is that, yeah, when people save a ton of money from not driving to work, from not taking trips, there's going to be a lag effect for economic hurt. But once people run out of money, I mean, this is what, again, keeps me up at night, is that the Fed, for some reason, doesn't seem to be allowing for that or understanding that. So they're like, oh, the jobs numbers are strong, so we're going to continue to hike, this and this. But I'm telling them, like, at some point, you are going to see the consumer run out of money, and that is going to kill the economy fast.
We are going to get to what everyone is wondering. What is Bitcoin going to do? So we are going to get to Gareth Soloway's updated Bitcoin price forecast, as well as his updated gold and stock market forecast. Yes. Which sectors are you most bullish on right now, and which sectors are you most bearish on right now?
So sectors I'm bullish on remain gold. Gold miners.
Oh, sorry. Let's focus on just the stock market.
Just the stock market. All right.
S&P 500.
So for me, I think Brazilian stocks, the EWZ is an ETF that tracks. Okay. It looks like it's breaking out here. I've been a big talker over the last 6 to 12 months about how people and institutions have overinvested in the US because it was the safest spot during COVID, so all this money came in, and they're underinvested in foreign markets, right? So you could even talk about China, although China has taken a big hit lately, but I think the EWZ is a beautiful chart, and I think people want to start looking other places. If we're going to be in a long term, and I told you this last time, I truly believe we won't see a new all-time high in the stock market for 10 years.
That's right. But which sector would get hit the hardest during this upcoming recession, Gareth?
Yeah, I think it's going to be these trusty stocks like an Apple. And again, percentage-wise, maybe not, but I think people will be shocked by how much more downside Apple can have. I have a price target under 100 on Apple for probably the next 12 months or so. And again, it's trading, last I checked, I think 140s or so.
That's specific to just Apple or all tech stocks?
All tech stocks will be affected, but I do think there are certain growth names that are smaller that have already been trounced 80, 90%, and those could see a little bit of a less downside. And again, keep in mind, everyone has run towards Apple, Tesla, these trusty stocks, including institutions. They've overinvested because it was supposedly the no-lose situation. And I do worry that there's going to be an exodus in those names, which, by the way, you have Apple dropping that much. Think about what the Qs could do, the NASDAQ 100. I mean, you could see some major downside in those names. So
is it a major concern in the sense that are you afraid of foreclosures around your neighborhood? Are you afraid of another Lehman-style crisis? Are you afraid of contagion like we saw in 2008?
Yeah, I am, absolutely, because number one,
Really?
we've heard about Credit Suisse, right? I mean, there was rumors just a couple weeks ago or a week ago about Credit Suisse having issues. And the thing is that, you know, the Fed has enabled the financial sector to do a lot of the same things they did in the last financial crisis, right? I mean, it's almost like no one's learning from the rules. I mean, even it's like the short term, everyone's just focused on how can we be the most robust economy in the short term. Well, guess what? Eventually that breaks, and that is an issue for sure.
Okay, so bottom line, do you think the Fed's going to pivot anytime soon?
So the Fed isn't gonna, so there's two things. Everyone thinks a pivot is where they start dropping rates.
Yeah.
My pivot is where they go from 75 to 50. So it's like the downsloping mountain versus the upsloping climb.
I'm
so
talking about just straight up stopping raising rates.
So just going to neutral. I do think by 2023, early first quarter, they're done. And I think you're going to see the jobs numbers. At some point, these jobs numbers are going to crack, and we're going to see a big drop and a fast drop. And again, this is going to coincide with people running out of this COVID savings and all of a sudden really pulling back. And think about 401ks. Think about your house. Like, as we see the housing prices fall, and we're starting to see that now, the wealth effect disappears. And people feel like it's one thing to say, I'm going to go buy a new car because my house just went up 100K in the last 3 months, and you know what, the economy's rocking. But now all of a sudden your house drops 100, 200,000, and you have other factors that are pulling you back. Now you just put on the brakes and the cliff dive occurs.
But a Fed pivot by 2023, what happens? What happens if by later that year in 2023 they pull a Bank of England, meaning they start buying assets again, which is exactly what they've been doing up until last year? So basically resuming QE. Can they do that next year? Can they?
Inflation, and I don't expect inflation to go back to 2% anytime soon. I mean, we're talking years above 2%. So they're going to be very reluctant, and this is going to be another point where we're going to all say the Fed was late again, just like they said it was transitory, it wasn't transitory, just like they said so they're always late, and then they always overdo it. We're seeing it right now. They were late about inflation because they thought it was transitory. Now they're hiking ridiculously. The same thing is going to come in. They're going to wait too long to lower rates and start stimulating, and then we're going to get into a much worse situation, and they'll have to drop rates and print even more money. Look at
moving forward, though, okay, so the Federal Reserve, if they do pivot by next year, does that signal to you a bottom in the markets by next year?
So my guess is it will signal a major bounce. But again, like I said before, stock market to me, 5-10 years before we make a new all-time high. But you know what it's gonna put a bottom in, and there's gonna be a new bull market. Bitcoin and gold will outperform, absolutely. As soon as you get a pivot, gold is gonna rip because the dollar will fall. Yeah. And Bitcoin still has some downside because it's still a risk asset, but down the line in like a year, I do expect a major bottom in Bitcoin.
Hold up, so are you saying the NASDAQ is gonna stay flat for 10 years as well?
So not flat, let's be clear on this, not making new all-time highs.
No new all-time
So like
highs.
think about the .com, right? It took 15 years to make new all-time highs on the NASDAQ, but you've still had mini bull markets in there with huge moves to the upside.
But okay, so wouldn't that mean that Bitcoin isn't going to make new all-time highs because it's been correlated with the stock market?
Yeah, so You would think that it wouldn't make new all-time highs, but I actually think that there will be a pivot in Bitcoin as it matures, as regulation helps people feel more confident, institutions feel more confident. You're going to start to see it being treated much more like gold, which will
So
then
it's going to start diverging from the stocks.
It will.
eventually.
Not yet. I want to be clear to everyone out there. It's still going to take some time, but there will be probably in about 12 months a divergence that begins.
Bitcoin forecast. Let's go. 6K was your last downside. What are you sticking to that?
So first support is 12 to 13,000. I think in the near term we're going to see a little bit of a bounce, then a wave down to 12 to 13, and then I do worry that you're going sub 10 to 8, maybe even worst case scenario 3,500. 3,500 very small percentage, but that would be the equivalent of Amazon.com's collapse in the .com era if it were to equal that.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming by.